"Sir, I believe you're in the wrong section." The voice rang out cold and clear like metal hitting the floor. The first-class cabin of American Sky Flight 721 suddenly fell silent. Every head turned toward the black man in a charcoal-grey suit, a stranger to them all. Yet in that instant, each gaze carried the same silent judgment. Ethan Walker, 40 years old, slowly folded his copy of The Economist. He looked up. The light from the window slid across his cheek, carving into his face, an expression as calm and unshakable as stone. He had lived through moments like this before, too many to be surprised anymore. Standing before him was Kara Mitchell, the lead flight attendant, 45 posture flawless, her smile trained to perfection, but her eyes were hard as glass. "This is my seat," Ethan said evenly, his voice deep and precise. He held out his e-ticket. Seat 2A. The golden light above the champagne glasses and tailored suits of first class seemed to dim. A silver-haired businessman looked up from his laptop. A Hollywood actor pretended to adjust his mask, though his phone camera was quietly recording. No one spoke, but the air itself reeked of suspicion. Kara looked at the ticket, then at him, as if waiting for a crack to appear in his composure. "Sometimes passengers make mistakes," she said lightly, her tone laced with condescension. Ethan gave a faint smile. Not today. Deep inside, a small tightening gripped his chest, the reflex of a man who had spent a lifetime proving he belonged. But outwardly, he remained still serene as a pond at dawn. That composure, that refusal to waver, irritated her. She turned away, greeting other passengers, leaving behind a chill in the air. Ethan leaned back, put on his headphones, and let the sound of a cello fill the silence, soothing the edges of his thoughts. He had promised himself long ago never to let small things knock him off orbit. But every orbit has a breaking point. 7 minutes later, as the plane prepared for takeoff, Kara returned. "So your carry-on must be stored in the overhead bin." Ethan opened his eyes. "It's under the seat exactly where regulations allow." "Sir, it's an obstruction to safety." Her tone was sharper now, a velvet blade. Ethan glanced across the aisle. A white passenger's oversized backpack sat in the exact same spot. He pointed, and that one, Kara's eyes, flicked toward it, then back to him. "We're authorized to make safety judgments as we see fit. Judgments or prejudice." The thought flashed through his mind, but he didn't say it. He simply drew a slow breath, stood up, and with deliberate calm, placed his briefcase in the overhead bin. The aluminum latch snapped shut with a cold metallic click. "Thank you for your cooperation," Kara said, her smile thin as a knife's edge. Ethan sat down, feeling something inside him fracture. He'd stayed silent before when he was stopped at stores, when he'd been asked to verify his identity in the very boardrooms of companies he'd invested in. But never, not once, had he been treated like a trespasser in a space he had paid for, to be left in peace. The music in his ears was now just a dull hum. Every attempt to focus on the melody only brought back the memory of being 17, trailed by a mall security guard while shopping for a suit for his Yale interview. 23 years later, the world claimed to have changed. It hadn't. The lights were fancier now, but prejudice still wore a uniform. In the cockpit, Captain David Ross, 56, finished his pre-flight checks. He'd seen hundreds of reports about unruly passengers. In his mind, unruly often meant too assertive. He didn't yet know what was happening in first class, but he already had a picture of the culprit. Back in the cabin, Kara approached, a third time, her voice tight as a piano string. "Mr. Walker, please turn off your phone. We're about to depart. Ethan raised the screen, the airplane mode icon glowing clearly. It's already on airplane mode. I don't appreciate your attitude, sir. You're making this difficult for the crew. That phrase, making it difficult, hit the weakest part of him. It felt like his entire life had been reduced to those 3 words. He looked at her eyes, calm to the point of danger. And I don't appreciate being harassed just because my skin doesn't match the color of your seats, he said slowly, each word a hammer striking steel. The air froze. Kara's face flushed red before she turned and stormed towards the cockpit. In that fleeting moment, Ethan knew things had gone too far. When Captain Ross emerged, his expression was cold as metal. So you've violated safety regulations and resisted crew instructions. We'll have to ask you to leave the aircraft. For placing my bag correctly and enabling airplane mode, Ethan asked. Because Ms. Mitchell feels unsafe, the captain replied. Those 2 words, feels unsafe, cut through him like a blade. Unsafe. The word society used to erase people like him. The cabin door opened. 2 security officers stepped in. No one spoke loudly, but the silence was louder than any insult. Ethan rose, slipped on his coat. Every step down the aisle was shadowed by staring eyes, some apologetic, some recording. Sophia Alvarez, the model in seat 3. Bea met his gaze, her eyes filled with quiet outrage. She whispered just loud enough for herself, "This isn't right." As he reached the door, Ethan heard Kara say to the captain, "Always people like him." 4 small words, soft yet sharp enough to crush something deep inside. Cold wind hit his face as he stepped off the jet bridge. Outside, snow was falling over New York. Ethan stood beneath the neon lights, and distant roar of engines caught between 2 worlds, one of reputation, the other of dignity. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I recorded everything. It wasn't right. Sophia, seat 3B. He stared at the screen, his fingers tightening. Something inside him shifted. Not rage, but calculation. He drew a long breath, eyes following the plane as it lifted off the runway. Then he whispered, barely audible, "It's fine. I'll buy the whole sky." As snow settled on his shoulders, Ethan Walker was no longer the man humiliated on a plane. He was a man who had just chosen the next empire he would build. And somewhere above the clouds, the world had already begun to tremble. Snow blanketed the sidewalk outside JFK Airport, the wind slashing across his face like a reminder that New York belonged to no one weak. Amid the sea of rushing travelers, Ethan Walker stood still. The silver suitcase beside him shimmered under the headlights of passing taxis, and in his eyes there was the silence of a storm forming. He didn't leave right away. He just watched through the glass as American Skyflight 721 rolled down the runway, the plane he was supposed to be on, the one where he should have been reading the last few pages of his book. Instead, he was here, the man who had been asked to leave the aircraft because a white woman said she didn't feel safe. Ethan smiled slightly, but it wasn't a smile. It was a vow. 2 hours later, inside the lobby of the Langham Hotel in Manhattan, warmth and luxury wrapped the air, shutting out the cold world beyond its glass doors. On the table sat an opened bottle of red wine and a steaming cup of espresso. 3 people gathered around a round table: Ethan Walker, Lena Brooks, and Michael Trent. Lena, 38. The sharp-eyed CEO, whose brown hair was tied neatly back, had been the first to believe in Ethan's vision when Atlas Capital was still a tiny office rented in Brooklyn. Michael, 46, legal counsel and former prosecutor, was the man who turned Ethan's anger into strategy. No one spoke for the first few seconds. Only the quiet sound of wine being poured filled the air, deep red, swirling in the glass, like a warning of what was coming. "You look calmer than I expected," Lena finally said. Ethan took a small sip. "Calm is the only thing they can't take from me." Michael rested his forearms on the table. The flight attendant was she, the chief purser. "Do we have recordings or witnesses?" Ethan set his phone down and played the message aloud. "I recorded everything. Sofia Alvarez, seat 3B. "We have everything," he said, his voice steady as cold steel. Michael leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. A clear discrimination lawsuit. Solid case, easy win. They'll have to pay millions, Ethan. And then what? Ethan asked, softly, so quiet it was almost dangerous. Michael frowned. After a year of legal battles, they write a check. They fire her, issue an apology, and move on like nothing ever happened. They never learn. He paused, his gaze fixed on the rim of his glass, where a drop of wine turned slowly like the hand of a clock. "No, I don't want to win the case. I want to change the board." Lena studied him. "What are you thinking, Ethan? What are you planning to do with the airline?" Michael added. Ethan lifted his eyes. Under the soft amber light, his face looked chiseled, defined by purpose. "I'm going to buy it." No one spoke. 1 second. 2. Then came a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're serious?" Lena asked. "Completely." Ethan rose and walked toward the glass wall. Manhattan glowed in the distance, its skyscrapers like swords made of light. He pointed toward the city and spoke slowly. "People think power lies in money. They're wrong. Power lies in the ability to rewrite the rules. And to rewrite them, I need to own the pen." Michael looked at him, a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You're planning to buy American Sky Airlines. Do you know who owns it?" Ethan turned back to face him. Sterling Holdings Group, headquartered in Chicago, valued at approximately $21 billion. Its CEO is Richard Holden, 63. I've invested long enough to know one thing: every empire has a crack. Lena frowned. "You're risking $21 billion over one arrogant flight attendant." Ethan met her gaze. "No, Lena. Over a system that allowed her to exist." The room fell into silence. Only the ticking of the wall clock broke it. Tick, 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 each sound like the heartbeat of a plan taking shape. "So what's the plan?" Michael asked. Ethan returned to the table, placing his hand over the tablet, displaying Sterling Holdings' shareholder map. "We won't strike directly. We'll move in the shadows." Lena leaned in her voice, low. "A silent takeover." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. Call it Project Mirage." He pointed at the chart. Sterling Holdings owns multiple divisions: the airline, hotel chains, shipping finance. They're stretched thin. If we quietly acquire the first 5% of their shares without raising alarms, we can keep collecting until it's too late. Michael frowned. "We're talking billions. That means shell companies, offshore investments, trades across multiple markets." Ethan smiled faintly. "You know I don't fear numbers. I only fear having no purpose." His voice dropped lower, slow and heavy. "She didn't just insult me. She insulted everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. I can't fix prejudice with an article or a hashtag, but I can change who holds the keys to that system." Lena was silent for a long time. She had seen Ethan cold, seen him negotiate with corporate giants, but she had never seen this fire a mix of justice and vengeance, burning in perfect control. "You know this won't just be a deal," she said quietly. "I know," Ethan replied. "It's a campaign." That night they stayed in the hotel until nearly dawn. On the table were scattered papers, financial flow charts, lists of anonymous companies and offshore investment funds. Each piece of Project Mirage fell into place like moves on a chessboard. As Lena prepared to leave, she paused at the door and asked, "Are you sure about this, Ethan? You could lose the company, even your reputation." He looked at her, his eyes cold but resolute. "Reputation is what others give you. Dignity is what you keep." The door closed softly behind her. The room was bathed in the pale grey light of early morning. Ethan stood by the window, watching the city wake the skyscrapers, flickering like a vast data network, people already chasing time. He picked up his phone and dialed. Marcus returned to the airport. "I'm not going to London anymore. The plan's changed." "Yes, sir." Then he called Lena again. "Prepare a list of offshore banks. I want to start today." His tone was steady, without a trace of hesitation. The next morning, the media still knew nothing. No one realized that one of America's wealthiest men, the same man escorted off a first-class flight, had just declared war. Not with words, but with numbers, shares, and silence. Sitting in his Atlas Capital office, Ethan studied the miniature model of the city spread across his desk. Every building had a price. Every empire had a flaw. He placed a small black chess piece on Chicago, the headquarters of Sterling Holdings, and whispered, "If they think I sat in the wrong seat, I'll buy the whole seat." Outside the glass, the winter sunlight cut through clouds, slicing across his desk in cold, golden lines. A new chapter had begun, not born of outrage, but of precision. Ethan Walker was no longer a victim. He had become the player, and the world's chessboard was about to tremble. In finance, real power does not live in money. It lives in information that others have not yet understood. And that morning, on the 47th floor of the Atlas Capitol building, Ethan Walker officially activated what would change the whole Sky Project Mirage. The main boardroom at Atlas had no windows. Outsiders called it the vault, the safe where billion-dollar plans were born in the dark. Cold white LED light reflected across the focused faces of his most trusted team, Lena Brooks, Chief Operating Officer, a strategist as sharp as a surgical blade. Michael Trent, Legal Counsel, the man who knows how to bend the law without breaking it. Gabriel Owens, Financial Analyst 41. The prodigy who predicted the 2008 crisis. Taylor Reid, Head of Market Intelligence. 36, who had worked with the NSA. Ethan stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back. No papers, no slides were needed. A single look from him quieted the room. Sterling Holdings Group. He began market value $21 billion, but in truth, it is an empire of illusions, a corporation sustained by reputation rather than performance. He tapped a button. The screen behind him flared to life with SHG's logo and a cascade of red plunging charts. Over 10 years, profits fell 34%. They hide losses by cutting pension funds, shifting debt to subsidiaries, and manufacturing phantom revenue. Numbers do not lie. They only need someone bold enough to read them. Gabriel nodded. If exposed, their stock would collapse within 48 hours. "We will not expose them," Ethan replied. "We will own them." He moved to the screen and pointed at the shareholder map. Project Mirage has 4 phases. His voice was slow, deep and steady as a cocked gun. Phase 1, silent accumulation. Michael, you will build a network of shell companies, Cayman, Luxembourg, Singapore, and several other jurisdictions, places where law shields shareholder identities. Understood, Michael said. How many layers enough that the SEC will need a year to trace them? Phase 2. sow confusion and weaken. Taylor, your task is to find Sterling's soft spots. Finance media internal politics. A mistimed article can shave billions off their market value. I do not want to destroy only to smoke out the room. Taylor smiled. I know some journalists who like the smell of smoke. Phase 3, make allies. Lena, you will watch their board find those tired of Richard Holden, the men he trod on to climb. Every empire has people who want it to fall. Lena scribbled notes. I already have a few names. Phase 4, the reveal. Ethan paused, eyes like blades, when their share price collapses, and the board fractures we step forward. Atlas Capital will hold 23% enough to replace the whole system. He lowered his voice. We are not doing a deal. We are opening a quiet revolution. Outside, rain traced slow paths down the glass like a countdown. Inside the room, no one spoke. They all understood they were launching more than a power play. They were waging war on a culture. Richard Holden will not sit still, Lena said, watching the charts. He's the kind of man who would hide his mistakes behind a flag. And that is precisely why Ethan answered. He will never suspect his enemy sits 800 miles away in a conference room. He laid his hand on the table, eyes cold with something Lena had never seen in him before, the calm cruelty of a man about to reclaim dignity with power. 3 weeks later, a small office in Zurich carried a sign, Northlight Investments AG. No one knew it was an Atlas subsidiary, and no one knew that each week Northlight bought hundreds of thousands of SHG shares through 7 different banks. In reports, it was merely minor market movement, but each small fluctuation was shaving Sterling's empire percentage by percentage. In New York, Ethan kept his composure, speaking at conferences about ethics in investing, praised by financial magazines as the model of calm professionalism. Only Lena knew that behind every speech lay a calculation of destruction. One evening, when the office was empty, Ethan stood alone before the vast glass, staring at the city. In the distance, office lights fractured across his face, like the fissures of an old world. He remembered the moment on the plane, the fake smile, the words, people like him. Those memories no longer wounded him, they fueled him. He took from his pocket an old photograph of his mother, Elaine Walker, a public school teacher who once taught him, dignity is not given, it is claimed. The next day, Lena brought a new report. We've reached 7% through 11 intermediary companies, she said. Perfect, Ethan replied. Keep this pace for 3 months. Not faster, not slower. Attention is the enemy of strategy. She looked at him, half admiration, half worry. Ethan, have you ever thought we might be going too far? A personal incident turned into a global campaign. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window and looked down at the lit-up stretch of Fifth Avenue. Lena, do you know why they think they can do this? Because they have power, she suggested. No. Because they think we will be silent. He turned back, low and resolute. Project Mirage is not only revenge, it is a way to prove that our silence has a price. This time they will pay with their empire. That night, Ethan returned to his apartment on Central Park West. The city below roared on, but inside he heard only his heart slow, heavy, precise, like the clock that measures strategy. He opened his laptop and reviewed the list of active shell companies. On the screen, a line flashed, Mirage Phase 1, in progress completion, 14%. Ethan typed a command and saved it, then whispered into the quiet as if swearing to the empty room. They kicked me out of a seat. I will kick them out of a kingdom. Across the ocean in London, Richard Halden sat in his classic oak-panelled office, sipping scotch, confident his conglomerate was rock solid. He did not know the rock was being hollowed from within. A light rain began over New York, each drop against the glass, a measured knock of fate. Inside the windowless room, the glow of the screen lit Ethan Walker's face, the man who had written the opening line of the most perfect financial coup of the century. Outside in the rain, a taxi slid by, advertising American Sky Airlines. The slogan still read, "Fly above the ordinary." Ethan saw it and smiled a cold smile. Above the ordinary, he whispered, "Let's see who really flies higher." New York's sky darkened, but in his eyes, a new empire was rising from the shadows. Darkness does not only hide things, it creates them. And within the darkness of Project Mirage, Ethan Walker was creating something that had never existed before, a financial coup without a single shot fired. 2 months had passed. New York was drenched in foggy winter nights, and deep inside the basement of Atlas Capital known as the Vault, the lights had never gone out. On the dim screens, endless streams of data flowed stocks, transactions, market signals. No one outside Ethan's team knew that every tiny trade was another step toward capturing Sterling Holdings Group. Weekly report, Lena said, eyes locked on the screen. We've secured 12.4% of their shares, spread across 19 shell companies. No suspicion. No one ever suspects, Ethan replied, his voice low but solid as steel. Because they can never imagine someone like me standing here. He spoke not with bitterness, but with a deep understanding of how power works. It does not need to hide it, only needs others to believe it could never exist in your hands. In Zurich, Northlight Investments kept buying quietly. In the Cayman Islands, Coral Equity reported success with 3% more of stock. In Singapore, Atlas East Holdings opened new intermediary accounts through 3 local banks. Everything operated like a Swiss watch, precise, invisible. And as Ethan signed another buy order, he knew Holden's empire was being dismantled piece by piece, while no one on the board had a clue. One evening, after the rest of the team had left, Lena stayed behind. On her screen was the shareholder map of SHG. She saw what few would ever notice. Ethan was not just buying a company, he was waging war on an entire system of invisible discrimination. He entered, coffee in hand, his voice slightly hoarse. "You're still here." "Couldn't sleep," Lena said. "I was thinking about this. Why the name Mirage, Ethan?" Looked out through the glass wall. Snow was falling, reflecting the city lights like drifting ribbons of silver. "Because the world believes in illusions," he said. "They think fairness exists. They think opportunity is equal. But really everything is light bent by prejudice. Mirage is how we use their illusion to bring the truth into focus." Lena fell silent. That answer didn't come from an investor, but from a man who had lived his whole life in the shadow of bias and decided never to accept it again. The next morning, Ethan flew to London, an unofficial trip under the pretext of visiting partners. On that flight, he sat in first class with another airline, British Crown Airways. No one stared, no one questioned him, no one asked if he was in the wrong seat. And that ordinary treatment reminded him that the world's problem was never its rules, but the people enforcing them. In London, Ethan met Dr. Madison Clark, the woman who had caught his attention in the earliest reports, an independent board member of SHG, and the only one among them with a conscience. Their meeting took place in a small cafe in Knightsbridge, unnoticed by anyone around. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Ethan began. "I know who you are. Madison replied, her British accent calm, but edged with caution. "And I know you disagree with how Richard Holden runs things," he said bluntly. Madison studied him, her gaze sharp. "I don't like rumors, but I dislike hidden truths even more." "What do you want?" Ethan placed a folder on the table, documents showing pension fund cuts, forged statements, manipulated financial reports. She opened it. Her eyes darkened. "Where did you get these?" "That's not important. What matters is, you know they're real." A long silence followed. Finally, Madison spoke. "If this is true, it's not just a financial crisis, it's a betrayal of trust for thousands of people." Ethan tilted his head. "And I need someone inside the system to help me prove it. I'm not here to destroy, I'm here to rebuild." Madison held his gaze for a long moment. "Are you fighting for justice, or for your pride?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Is it wrong if it's both?" She let out a soft laugh, but in her eyes, agreement had already formed. As they left the cafe, Madison turned back and said, "Richard Holden has a habit of believing everything is under his control. When he realizes it isn't, it'll be an interesting day." Ethan replied, "That day is coming." 3 weeks later, Sterling Holdings began appearing on the radar of financial analysts. Trading volume rose slightly. Market observers noted renewed institutional interest. Halden read the report and chuckled. "The market's finally recognizing our real value," he said to his executive team. None of them knew that their enemy was the one feeding money into their veins just to pull them down. Meanwhile, in New York, Ethan held a progress meeting. "We're at 17.3%, Gabriel reported. "Good," Ethan said. "Keep that pace. Everything must stay ordinary." Taylor added, "Holden's flying to the States, soon to meet investors. He's not suspicious yet, but he's heard about some strange movements in the market." "Perfect," Ethan said, a half smile curving his lips. "Let him come. I want him to see the man digging his grave and still not recognize him." That night, when everyone left, Ethan remained alone in the empty boardroom. On the table, the shareholder map of SHG glowed on the screen, 17% marked in blue, the color of Atlas. He stared at the number for a long moment, then whispered, "This isn't because I want revenge. It's because I want to make sure they can never do it to anyone else." A gentle breeze slipped through the doorway, stirring the curtains. Under the dim light, his shadow stretched long across the floor, thin, straight, silent, like an exclamation mark. The next morning, as Lena entered the office, she held up a copy of the Financial Herald. The headline read, "Sterling Holdings. The sleeping giant wakes." She tossed the paper onto Ethan's desk. "The media's starting to notice." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Good. Let them think the giant is waking." He rose and gazed toward the skyline. "Because they don't know the giant is being pulled down 1 inch at a time." In Chicago, inside his lavish oak office, Richard Holden poured a glass of scotch and called his chief financial officer. "John, anything unusual in the market?" "Nothing significant, sir. Just minor fluctuations." "Then there's nothing to worry about," Holden said, smiling with self-satisfaction. Across the ocean at that same moment, Ethan Walker spoke softly. "Exactly. Let him believe that." On the screens inside the vault, the numbers changed again. 18.9%. Project Mirage continued silent, unseen. Only the terrifying calm of a man rewriting the definition of justice through silence. And somewhere between 2 time zones, one empire slept while another man smiled in the dark. Collapse when planned with enough precision, always begins with a handshake. And in Ethan Walker's world, no handshake was ever accidental. London was draped in a silver fog that afternoon. Inside the dim bar of Claridge's hotel, golden light fell across the tables where Ethan sat, waiting, his back straight, his glass of wine, untouched eyes, gleaming like cut glass. Across from him sat Dr. Madison Clark, the only woman on the board of Sterling Holdings Group, and perhaps the only person there who still possessed a conscience. She wore a black suit, her hair tied back, her gaze sharp, the kind of leader whose every step and every word carried weight. "You're not afraid I'll report this meeting to Richard Holden?" Madison asked, her voice cool. "If you do," Ethan replied, "then I'll know I misjudged you. And if you judged right, then I'll invite you to stand on the winning side." Before meeting Madison, Ethan had spent nearly 2 weeks having Taylor Reed Atlas's market intelligence director collect every detail about her. Taylor had discovered that Madison was a woman trapped between morality and politics. She had once tried to warn about pension fund discrepancies, but was silenced by Holden himself. "She's not hungry for power," Taylor said. "She's just waiting for a reason big enough to fight back." And now that reason sat right across from her. Ethan placed a silver USB drive on the table. Inside this, he said slowly, is proof that Holden has been defrauding the pension fund for 6 years. He's been using employee money to cover his losses from a failed investment in Asia. Madison looked at the USB, then back at him. "What do you want me to do with it?" "Nothing. Not yet. I just want you to know the truth." She was silent for a long while. "Why tell me, Ethan? Because I'm the only one on the board not loyal to Holden, or because you need someone inside to help you?" He didn't deny it. "Both. But more importantly, because I know you can't pretend not to see what's wrong. I saw that look in your eyes during last year's shareholder broadcast, when Holden cut the employee benefits and called it financial optimization. You couldn't hide the look of someone witnessing what she couldn't forgive." Madison took a sip of wine. "I once believed in him. Holden used to represent the best of British tradition, polished, firm, efficient. But over time I realized he was just another man defending his throne with excuses." Ethan nodded. "That throne is about to break, and I don't plan to rebuild it. I plan to build a new one." She studied him, half skeptical, half intrigued. "You really intend to take over the entire corporation? All because of one flight?" He chuckled softly. "There's never a just because. Do you know what it feels like to be thrown out of a first-class seat, Madison? Not because you were wrong, but because someone refused to believe you belonged there." He tilted his head. "I'm not seeking revenge. I'm restructuring." The air thickened around the words. Madison swirled her glass, watching the deep red liquid spin. "Suppose I help you. Suppose you succeed. What will you do with people like Holden?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Make them face the cost of their prejudice. And if they refuse, I'll turn that cost into a public lesson." She gave a faint, wry smile. "You sound like a reformer with the heart of a vengeful man." "What's the difference," he said, "when the world only changes when it fears loss?" Madison fell silent. Inside, her duty and conscience wrestled for dominance. But as Ethan stood to leave, she spoke softly. "Can you send me the full pension fund accounting files?" Ethan turned back, a quiet smile crossing his face. "I already have. Check your encrypted inbox." She met his eyes one last time before walking out. When the door closed behind her, Ethan knew Project Mirage now had an insider link. 2 weeks later, chaos erupted inside Sterling Holdings' London headquarters. Leaks began spreading through the media about suspected financial misconduct in the company's pension fund. No one knew the source. Madison stayed silent, but in internal emails, she subtly questioned the board's transparency. Richard Holden was furious. Nonsense, he roared during an emergency meeting. We'll sue any newspaper that prints this story. But when the company's lawyer asked, then shall we release the accounting reports to disprove it? Holden said nothing. In that silence, everyone in the room began to understand. The first cracks in the empire had begun to show. In New York, Ethan monitored everything through the screen. Sterling's stock chart began to tremble, thin red lines dipping in continuous waves. Lena glanced at him. "What do we do next?" "Nothing," Ethan replied. "Let the truth speak for itself. Aren't you worried they'll suspect manipulation? If they do, they'll chase a ghost. And ghosts don't leave fingerprints." He powered off the screen. In the reflection, his face was cold, but his eyes gleamed with something else, a fusion of strategy and conviction. Meanwhile, Madison was summoned to Holden's office. He sat behind a desk cluttered with papers, trying to sound calm. "Someone says you've been sharing internal information," Madison replied evenly. "Then someone's right." The room went silent. Holden stared, stunned. "You realize you've just destroyed your career?" She smiled faintly. "No. I've just saved my integrity." Then she stood and walked out, leaving him alone amid the numbers that no longer meant anything. When Ethan received the encrypted message, "He knows. I'm out. MC." He simply nodded. The plan was still on course. Holden now had two choices: fight the truth or be consumed by it. He turned to Lena. "Begin phase 2. I want the media to have more to work with, not attacks, just questions. The more questions, the less trust." Lena nodded. "And what about Madison?" Ethan looked distant. "She's no longer part of the game," he said quietly. "But she'll remember who taught her how to leave the board." That night, rain poured over London. In a small apartment in Chelsea, Madison sat before her laptop, reading the headline, "Sterling Holdings, Facing Internal Review Over Pension Irregularities." She closed her eyes, not in fear, but in relief. Across the ocean, Ethan stood on the rooftop of Atlas Capital, watching the rain fall through the city lights. He spoke softly to himself. Every empire needs a traitor to fall. But this time the traitor is the one who's right. Lightning split the sky. And in that flash of light, Project Mirage entered its next stage, shifting from silence to attack. They say empires do not fall because of enemies. Outside they fall because trust within begins to crack. And that morning, Sterling Holdings heard its first fracture echo from the inside. At the Chicago headquarters, the boardroom on the 35th floor blazed under crystal chandeliers, yet the air was suffocating. Richard Holden, the proud chairman and symbol of an older order, slammed a stack of papers onto the table. "Trash news fabrication. There is no pension fund shortfall." His voice rang like a hammer, but the directors around him only averted their eyes. No one spoke. No one dared. On the wall, a screen showed the Bloomberg headline, "Sterling Holdings accused of mismanaging pension funds." The company's shares had dropped 6% in 24 hours. Holden turned to the chief financial officer, each word forced through clenched teeth. "Kill this story." "I want an immediate rebuttal," the man mumbled. "We cannot rebut until we have a fresh audit, sir." Holden glared. "Are you questioning me?" No one answered, but in that silence, fear had changed sides. In New York, inside the vault beneath Atlas Capitol, Ethan Walker watched the developments across a wall of screens. Headlines flickered, red charts fell in steady cascades. He stood in the cold light, the calm of a man studying a painting he himself had just finished. Sterling is down 12% this week, Gabriel reported. We have reached 23.1% of the shares. They still have not realized who is buying. Lena looked up, lips pressed tight. Ethan, is it time to go public? He shook his head. Not yet. Wait one more beat. Let them tangle themselves. That evening, Ethan flew to London, not to hide, but to confront. The British financial world was roiling. Rumours spread like fire. An American investor was quietly taking Sterling holdings. No one knew who. No one dared to say the name. But at lavish parties and in late-night calls, the name Ethan Walker began to slip from lips, a shadow becoming real. 2 days later, Holden called a press conference in London to reassure investors. The Savoy's conference hall was packed with reporters. On stage, Holden wore a charcoal suit, his tone still imperious, though his breathing had lost its steadiness. Sterling Holdings is a symbol of stability, he declared. We will not bow to short-term speculators. Amid the sea of lenses, a journalist stood. Mr. Holden, there are reports that a United States fund has quietly acquired more than 20% of Sterling. Do you have a comment? Holden froze. Camera flashes sliced like knives. Then he gave a thin smile. Rumor is the food of the weak. Sterling is not threatened by a ghost. The answer streamed live around the world. In New York, Ethan watched on the big screen. When he heard the word ghost, he smiled. If they call us a ghost, he said to Lena, then it is time to take shape. 3 days later, on the London Stock Exchange, a short press release appeared, only 4 sentences long, yet enough to rattle the entire financial sector. Atlas Capital Partners hereby confirms ownership of 23.4% of Sterling Holdings Group. We believe the company requires a change in leadership to restore shareholder trust. We will call a special vote to restructure the board. Signed, Ethan Walker, founder and chief executive officer, Atlas Capital. The news spread like wildfire. The BBC, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal all ran with it. Black American billionaire declares war on British conglomerate. The first black American in history to launch a takeover battle against a British financial empire. The press split in two. One side admired him, the man daring to challenge the old order. The other bristled the outsider, trespassing on heritage. In Chicago, Holden threw down the paper, his hand shaking. Walker, he hissed. What does that punk think he is? In the Atlas office. Ethan simply told Lena, we did not come to ask for a seat. We came to change the table. The war had officially begun. Holden summoned the entire Sterling board. 12 members sat around the ancient oak table, and none of them could meet another's gaze. Holden spoke in a roughened voice. We must stand united against him. I will buy back shares to reinforce control. One member asked, with what money Richard the company has lost $4 billion in market value this past month. Holden struck the table. I will find a way. At the peak of the tension, the doors opened. Madison Clark walked in, the woman Holden thought would stay silent forever. I have a proposal, she said. We do not need to fight Walker. We need to hear him. The room stared, stunned. Holden's voice went cold. You have taken his side, Madison answered. I have taken the side of the truth. The vote date was set, March 15th. The venue, the Savoy Hall, where Holden had once declared that Sterling would not bow to a ghost. This time, the ghost walked in through the front door. Before the television cameras, Ethan took the podium. No theatrics, no anger, only authority in silence. He looked straight at the board. I did not come to destroy Sterling. I came to save it from its own arrogance. He put the proof of pension fraud on the screen, signatures, fabricated transfers, manipulated figures. The entire hall held its breath. Heldon tried to steady himself, his voice trembling. "You are fabricating this." Ethan answered. "If I am, then why do those accounts match your personal account numbers in Bermuda?" A ripple of shock swept the room. Heldon blanched. A single second of silence stretched into a decade. Then chairs scraped half the board, stood and walked away from his side. The vote took 30 minutes. The result, Ethan Walker was elected the new chairman of Sterling Holdings with 64% in favor. Reporters swarmed. Heldon stood motionless, staring at the man he had once called an outsider. Ethan stepped closer and extended his hand. "Thank you for keeping my seat warm for so long." Heldon did not take it. He turned and left in silence, carrying with him all the pride of an era that had ended. As the shutters finally quieted, Ethan lifted his gaze to the hall's ceiling, where crystal chandeliers glittered like falling stars. He spoke softly, the microphone catching every word. "I do not need to fly first class to be respected. I only need to make sure no one else is ever thrown out of their place." Below, Madison smiled faintly. She understood this fight was not only his, it belonged to everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. And amid the bright flashes, Ethan Walker, the man once pushed out of a seat, had reclaimed the entire boardroom table. A new chapter for Sterling Holdings began. But Ethan knew the real victory was not today. Because for justice to endure, it must be rebuilt by the very people who once broke it. No sound echoes louder than the silence that follows victory. The day Ethan Walker became the new chairman of Sterling Holdings Group, the entire financial world seemed to hold its breath. Major newspapers raced to print their headlines, "Black Billionaire Topples a Century-Old British Aristocratic Empire." From first-class cabin to top boardroom, the incredible rise of Ethan Walker. But for Ethan himself, there was no triumphant roar inside him, only a strange emptiness, as if, when the storm had passed, the captain still couldn't believe he had survived. On his first morning in his new role, he walked into Sterling's Chicago headquarters. Heldon was gone. The portraits of white chairmen that once lined the hallways were gone. Only blank walls remained faintly scented with fresh paint. Ethan paused before the door marked Boardroom A. Inside, more than 20 senior executives were waiting. Their eyes reflected a spectrum of emotion, fear, curiosity, doubt, and quiet defiance. He walked to the head of the table but didn't sit down yet. "Before I begin," he said, his voice deep and steady, "I want you to know, I didn't come here for revenge. I came to make things right." A middle-aged man spoke, his tone edged with challenge. "Right by whose standard, sir?" Yours. Ethan met his gaze. "No. By what is just." The room went silent. Then he sat and opened the thick file before him. "My first act as chairman, I'm ordering a full audit of every part of this company. Pension funds, investment contracts, human resources policies. Anyone who defrauds, favors, or hides wrongdoing will face consequences. Including me, if I am wrong." A woman at the far end of the table whispered, "This is the first time I've ever heard a chairman say that." Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe because most of them stayed in the seat too long. For the next 3 weeks, Ethan practically lived in his office. Together with Lena Brooks, the new chief operating officer transferred from Atlas, he rebuilt the company's structure from the ground up. Hundreds of employees were suspended. thousands of documents rechecked. But when everyone expected Ethan to clean house with an iron hammer, he did something that stunned them all. One afternoon, Mark Reynolds, the chief executive of Sterling's airline subsidiary, Sky America, was called in. He was the same man who had signed the $500 customer apology letter after Ethan was thrown off his own flight. Mark bowed his head, voice trembling. "I know I mishandled it." "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker." Ethan sat in silence for a long time, studying him. "I've read your record," he said. "You've been here 22 years. You once won the Inspirational Leadership Award. Yet you allowed an employee to treat a passenger like trash." Why? Mark swallowed hard. "I thought it was just a small misunderstanding. I didn't want to make it worse." Ethan nodded, "And that's exactly why it became worse." He stood and walked toward the window. "I could fire you right now, but I won't. Instead, I want you to return to Sky America, not as CEO, but as lead trainer for a new program called Respect First." Mark looked up stunned. Trainer Ethan's eyes were sharp but kind. "I want you to teach what you forgot, that respect doesn't come with a seat assignment, and that lesson has to come from the one who failed." A week later, Ethan met again with Cara Mitchell, the chief flight attendant, who had once ordered him off that plane. She sat in a small conference room, hands clenched, face pale. "I suppose you're here to ruin my life," she said, her voice shaking. Ethan placed a file on the table. "You're wrong. I'm here to repair it." She looked up, confused. "I've terminated your employment," he said, "but I've kept your health insurance active for 6 months. I know you're raising a daughter with a heart condition." Tears filled her eyes. Why would you do that?" "After what I did," Ethan answered softly. "Because if I retaliate, I'm no better than the people who humiliated me." He turned to leave, then paused. "You haven't lost everything, Cara. You've only lost the chance to hide your mistake. Now you get to use it to redeem yourself." The door closed behind him, leaving Cara in tears. The next day, Ethan received an email. "I've applied to start a volunteer training program for new attendants on diversity and empathy. Thank you for not destroying me. KM." He smiled at the message, then deleted it, not out of indifference, but because he believed redemption didn't need an audience. 3 months passed. Sterling Holdings began to heal. The media stopped talking about scandal and started talking about a new era of leadership. Stock value rose 40%. The pension fund was fully restored. Inside the company, Ethan launched an initiative called The Bridge, connecting employees across all levels and allowing them to anonymously share experiences of bias, discrimination, and injustice. Every week, he read each report himself. He didn't delegate it. One evening, Lena walked in to find him still at his desk, eyes red from fatigue. "You can't do everything alone, Ethan," she said. He smiled faintly. "I know, but I need them to believe at least one person is truly listening." On Sterling's 100th anniversary, Ethan took the stage not in an expensive suit, but a plain white shirt. Behind him, the screen displayed the company's history from its first factory and its early flights to the pension fund scandal. He spoke slowly, his voice filling the crowded hall. This company was built by the sweat of thousands, but it was nearly destroyed by the silence of a few in power. Today I want to rebuild Sterling, not to erase its past, but to be worthy of it. The applause thundered. Madison Clark, now the new chief executive officer, joined him on stage, took his hand and whispered, "You know, maybe the world doesn't need more people who win. It needs more people who can forgive." Ethan nodded gently. He looked toward the front row where Cara Mitchell sat quietly holding her little daughter's hand. The stage lights softened on them, warm as morning sunlight. When the ceremony ended, Ethan remained alone in the empty hall. He gazed up at the new Sterling logo on the wall, just one simple line of words. Respect is our capital. Respect is our true currency. He smiled, stepped down from the stage, and ran his hand gently across the front row seat, the one that once belonged to Richard Holden. And in that moment, he understood. Victory isn't taking someone else's seat. It's when every seat in the room becomes worthy of being occupied. Outside, the Chicago night was calm. The wind stirred the row of flags bearing the new Sterling emblem. One era had ended. Another, more human, more just, had just begun. A year had passed since Ethan Walker took control of Sterling Holdings. The market called it the quietest revolution in modern financial history. No lawsuits, no blood, just a man who had once been thrown out of a seat, now changing how the entire world saw the meaning of that seat. It was an early spring morning. The Chicago International Airport gleamed under the sun. A Sky America Airlines jet, bearing its new logo, was preparing for takeoff, the golden reflection of its slogan shining beneath the fuselage. Respect first, always. Ethan sat in seat 2, at the very place where everything had begun. The first-class cabin was now filled with natural light, no longer divided by rigid barriers between those with privilege and those without. A young flight attendant approached her smile, genuine rather than rehearsed. "Good morning, Mr. Walker. Thank you for flying with Sky America." He nodded gently. "Thank you. Everything feels different now." She smiled, her eyes bright. "We learned all this from the Respect First program. You're the founder, aren't you?" Ethan simply smiled and said nothing. He looked out the window. The sky was clear and boundless. In that quiet moment, he realized he had come full circle. Meanwhile, in another part of America, Cara Mitchell, the woman who had once ordered him off that plane, stood on stage at the National Aviation Service Academy. Behind her, the screen displayed the words, bias awareness and human dignity training. Cara was now a sought-after speaker, teaching service professionals how to eliminate bias. She told her story not to defend herself, but to awaken others. Her voice trembled. "I once thought serving passengers meant following procedures. But real service is seeing the person behind the ticket. I learned that lesson the hardest way possible, and I am grateful to the man who gave me the chance to make it right." The audience rose to their feet in applause. Cara bowed, eyes glistening. In her heart, she heard his voice from long ago. "You haven't lost everything, Cara. You've only lost the chance to hide your mistakes." Now she had turned that mistake into a legacy of change. In London, Madison Clark, the new chief executive of Sterling, stood before an international conference on corporate ethics. She unveiled the Ethical Horizon Initiative, a global leadership ethics program sponsored by Sterling. Her speech was quoted across major outlets. "The greatest asset of any company is not its capital, but how it treats those with less power." In the front row, Ethan sat quietly, hands clasped. He didn't need to speak. He only needed to witness the seeds he had planted begin to bloom. That evening, back in his hotel room, Ethan opened his laptop. Hundreds of congratulatory emails, dozens of invitations, interviews, awards. He scrolled past them all and stopped at one message. From Sofia Alvarez, Seat 3B, subject still flying. "Mr. Walker, I don't know if you remember me. I was the passenger in Seat 3B, the one who filmed that day. I just saw the news about Sterling and Sky America. When I saw you sitting again in seat 2A, I cried. Not because justice won, but because dignity still has a place in this world. Thank you for not choosing revenge. Thank you for making the sky a kinder place to fly. Ethan read slowly each word, landing like a quiet knock on his heart. He remembered that snowy day when he stood alone outside the airport, stripped of his seat. And now, just 1 year later, that same sky bore his name, not through ownership, but through meaning. 3 months later, the New York Times ran an exclusive feature titled Ethan Walker, the Man Who Brought Back Prejudice. When asked what made him proudest, Ethan simply said, "Not that I won, but that today I no longer have to fight for a seat, because everyone has one." The story went viral. Business schools added his journey to their leadership ethics courses. Across social media, the hashtag #RespectFirst became a movement. From a moment of personal humiliation, Ethan had unknowingly sparked a cultural reform. One summer afternoon, he returned to Sterling's headquarters. The glass facade shimmered with the red hues of sunset. On his desk sat an old photo, him with his mother, Elaine Walker, the woman who once told him, "Dignity is not given, you have to claim it." He touched the frame gently, as if to say, "Mum, I did it not for me, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel small." Lena entered and placed a newspaper on his desk. "Have you seen this?" The headline read, "Sky America achieves highest customer satisfaction in the United States for the first time in history." Below it was a photo of Cara Mitchell smiling in a training session. Lena looked at Ethan and smiled. "You did it, Ethan." He shook his head. "We did it." Then he stood and looked out the window. The Chicago River shimmered like a trail of silver, flowing slow and steady. The water reflected the sunset, much like his own life, once turbulent, once wounded, now peaceful. Night fell. Ethan went home and sat by the window. The city slept, its lights glowing like golden veins running through the dark. He opened his notebook and wrote the final line of his journal. "I was once thrown out of my seat, but it was only when I stood up that I truly saw the world. Some people use power to make others fear. I choose to use power to make them respect." He closed the notebook and gazed out at the horizon, where a Sky America plane climbed into the night. The day's last ray of sunlight glided across its body, catching his eyes. In the cockpit, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are flying at 36,000 feet. The skies ahead are clear. Thank you for choosing Sky America, where every flight begins with respect." Ethan smiled softly. The words sounded like a routine announcement, but to him they were the perfect ending to a long journey. Beyond the horizon, the sunset faded into night. The sky was calm, clear, and cleansed, and somewhere above the clouds, his mother's spirit must have been smiling, because her son, the one once denied his seat, had spent his life making sure the world had room for everyone. A year later, Sterling Holdings was no longer just an old name buried in financial reports, but a symbol of a new generation of companies where humanity stood side by side with profit. In the Chicago headquarters boardroom, Ethan Walker stood before a large, strategic map pinned to the wall. The red lines that once marked losses had vanished, replaced by fresh shades of green representing growth with integrity. He didn't talk about money. He didn't talk about stocks. He talked about trust. "We will scale back our shipping division," he declared. "We'll invest in aviation hospitality and clean technology things that build the future, not just spend the wealth of the past." The room fell silent, then filled with a wave of approving applause. In London, Madison Clark had taken over as Chief Executive Officer, leading Sterling into a new era of global expansion, humanitarian projects across Africa, entrepreneurship programs for women, and a scholarship fund named the Airline Initiative, in honor of Ethan's mother. One morning, Lena Brooks walked into his office. "Good news," she said, placing a report on his desk. "Stock value up 48%. Sky America has reached its highest customer satisfaction rating in history. We've paid off every debt Holden left behind." Ethan nodded, his tone calm, but his eyes alight. "Finally, we're building something that's not only valuable but meaningful." On his desk sat a model of a Sky America jet with the new logo. Under the fuselage, the words read, "Every seat matters." Every seat matters, a small phrase that had become the guiding philosophy of an entire company. Downstairs, the main lobby of Sterling was crowded with employees. They had gathered to witness a simple but powerful moment, the removal of the old bronze plaque that read, "Sterling Holdings established 1924. In its place, Ethan mounted a new plaque engraved with just 3 words: respect, integrity, humanity. Applause erupted across the hall. Faces lit up, a few streaked with tears. They were not just working for a company, they were living a vision. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Ethan remained alone. He gazed at the new plaque, the light glinting off its metallic surface, forming long reflections that looked like flight paths. He closed his eyes, recalling that snowy day at the airport when he had whispered, "I'll buy back the sky." Now he hadn't just bought it back. He had changed its color from cold to compassionate. Outside, a Sky America plane ascended into the night, leaving behind a thin white contrail across the sky, like a signature written in air. Ethan smiled softly and whispered, "No one gets thrown out of their seat anymore." And under the moonlit Chicago sky, an empire had been reborn through dignity. 2 years later, the morning sky over Chicago was clear and pure, as if the whole city had been washed clean. A new Sky America jet, painted in shimmering silver and blue, lifted gracefully from the runway. Along its side gleamed the words, "Legacy of Respect." In the first-class cabin, Ethan Walker sat quietly, in seat 2A, the seat of destiny. Before him was a cup of coffee, its steam curling into thin wisps of mist. There were no suspicious glances anymore, no one asking, "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Only warm smiles, equal greetings, and a peace he once thought he would never find again. Across the ocean at the International Aviation Academy in London, Cara Mitchell was teaching a class. She was no longer the dismissed flight attendant, but the founder of the Human First program. Standing at the podium, she told her story. But this time, there were no tears, only gratitude. "A man once showed me," she said, "that real justice isn't about making the guilty pay. It's about making them understand the worth of others." The entire class rose to applaud. Cara smiled her gaze, turning toward the window where a Sky America plane passed by in the distance. That same day, Madison Clark sent Ethan a special report. Sterling Holdings had achieved a 96% employee satisfaction rate, the highest in its history. The Airline Initiative Scholarship Fund had supported more than 4,000 black students studying aerospace engineering. Sky America had become the first airline in the world to earn the Zero Bias Airline certification. Ethan read it, then leaned back in his chair. On his desk still sat the same old photo of his mother, the woman who once told him, "Dignity is not given, you have to claim it yourself." He whispered softly, "Mom, I did claim it for everyone." By late afternoon, Ethan stepped onto the rooftop of the Sterling building, where a flag bearing the company's new logo fluttered in the wind. The gusts were strong, but he stood tall eyes fixed on the horizon. Below him, Chicago glowed with thousands of lights, every window shining like a story he had somehow touched. Lena Brooks joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're retiring?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Not retiring, just taking flight again." She nodded, understanding. Because for men like him, justice never truly ends. It only changes, shape grows new wings, and keeps flying. The last plane of the day crossed the horizon, its silver wings bathed in sunset red. Ethan watched it, the reflection of light glimmering in his eyes. "Once they told me I was sitting in the wrong place," he said softly. "Now I know the right place is wherever I help others be respected." The sky was silent, vast, and deep. And up there, his legacy remained not of power, but of humanity. From the perspective of an expert in leadership culture and professional ethics, Ethan Walker's journey is not merely a story about reclaiming justice for himself, but a living testament that true power does not lie in the seat we occupy, but in how we help those around us feel respected. He did not destroy the old system through anger, but transformed it through dignity, turning personal humiliation into a collective legacy. In a world where prejudice still seeps quietly through every process, Ethan reminds us that sometimes, instead of shouting for a place, we must stand up and build an entire room where everyone has a seat. If you believe that justice does not need noise, only perseverance, then, like this video to share that message. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories where human dignity is tested by power, and before you leave, comment with the phrase that reflects your belief: keep your dignity.